So I'm Heather Schneider. I'm the Director of Conservation and Research at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden. And what I'm going to attempt to do with my talk is to build a bit of a bridge between Doug's work and what we're doing at the garden, and talk about the multifaceted ways that we're trying to promote native plants and landscapes, and also connections between people and native plants. And I want to start out by saying that I didn't do most of the work I'm about to talk about. This was done by a whole host of folks at the garden and our collaborators, outside organizations, volunteers, funding entities. So it's, conservation is really a people-driven endeavor, and I think this is a good example of that. So don't ask me any hard questions, okay? And the way that I'm thinking about the work that I'm talking about today is that the garden is really working to nurture nature connections. And we're doing that a few different ways and coming at it from multiple angles. So in the Department of Conservation and Research, we like to investigate and work to understand, and that's where we're studying the web of life in nature. And once we understand those connections in natural spaces, we can think about how to rebuild them in disturbed and degraded places. And once we do that, we can start to think about, what do we do in landscapes where we're not going to restore a full ecosystem, but we still see some benefit to having ecosystem services and maybe some transferable benefits to humans. And then finally, but definitely not the smallest piece of what we do, is just working to connect people to nature in every way we can think of. Because I think a lot of times we forget that we're also part of the web of life. And underpinning all of the work that we do at Santa Barbara Botanic Garden is this idea that native plants are the foundation of life on Earth. Doug made a really good case for that, and it's a non-trivial thing, and this is also a powerful tool that we can use to right some of the wrongs that we've perpetrated. Now, if I was a mycologist, I might tell you that soil microbes or fungi are the foundation of all life on Earth, and I might be right, but for today, it's native plants all the way. So when we start out trying to understand the web of life, that usually looks like our group of scientists going out into nature and watching things, manipulating things, studying them. So I'm going to tell you about a plant that's near and dear to my heart. This is work I actually did participate in, studying the California jewel flower at Carrizo Plain National Monument. This is a state and federally endangered wildflower that occurs at Carrizo and a few other places in Central California. And the rare plant team and ecology team at the garden have been working together for years to understand the life cycle of this plant. When does it come up? How does it vary from year to year? What's eating it? What's pollinating it? How many seeds is it producing? What are the threats? All in the service of understanding how not just the jewel flower is doing, but how it connects to its neighbors within the community. And I started working on this plant in 2017. Which was a beautiful super bloom at Carrizo, if you were around for that. And I noticed that year and every year since, whether the plants are 2 feet tall or 2 inches tall, something was eating them. And the plants co-occur with giant kangaroo rat mounds, and so I assumed that it was the giant kangaroo rat, which is federally endangered. But I didn't know for sure until a few years ago when we finally put out some game cameras and caught them red-handed. And people often ask me, oh my gosh, it's eating an endangered plant. Is that bad? What are you going to do about the giant kangaroo rat? I'm going to let it eat its plants, because this is how they evolve together. They help each other. There's a little bit of loss on the jewel flower, but it's helping the kangaroo rat, and that's totally fine. This is one of those connections in nature. So we have an endangered rodent eating an endangered plant, and then adding to that is the federally threatened San Joaquin kit fox, which eats the kangaroo rat, which eats the endangered wildflower. So you start to see this rare and imperiled thread of the web of life taking shape at Carrizo Plain National Monument. But of course, these organisms don't exist in a vacuum. They're connected to a lot of other organisms at Carrizo Plain. And when we start to think about all these connections, we get the idea that while single species conservation is important and useful, it's not the whole story. And so we have to think about the whole community and how to protect that. And then we start to think about, okay, everything really is connected, just like the systems in our body. If we pull out one piece, we can tumble the pile. I don't know, what are we tumbling? Something, pile of rocks. And so once we have an idea of how these connections are interwoven in nature and who relies on who, then we can take that information and use it to start rebuilding those connections in areas that have been disturbed or degraded. So this is a picture of Elings Park, near and dear to the hearts of Santa Barbarans, where the garden has been working for 3 years on a 1-acre transformation of a site that was heavily invaded with non-native plants. And we came in, we were working to test different weed treatments to see how can we best control the weeds to make room for the native plants, and then installed a combination of native coastal sage species as well as chaparral, and then also a few plants that we're calling climate-forward plantings, which are things that don't currently occur in Santa Barbara County, but maybe occur to our south, like San Diego, where it's already a little bit warmer and drier than it is here, to do a little bit of an experiment and see if over time we need to help plants move because the climate is changing. If we bring these plants north, do they start making connections with the web of life locally? Do they survive to reproduce? And that just gives us a little bit of information about how we might help nature move in the future. We also felt safe doing it at Elings because it's surrounded by urban area, so we're not worried about these non-local genotypes escaping into our wildlands. So it's a perfect little laboratory. And while we're doing all of this, we're collecting lots and lots of data about how are the plants doing, how are weed treatments working, and then who's using these plants once they come in. And Zach Phillips, who's speaking next, will give you a lot more details about those results. But over 3 years, we've installed more than 2,300 native plants at Elings Park, with more than 1,000 volunteer hours. So this is what I'm saying. This is a people-driven endeavor, and we've had a lot of people helping at Elings. We've also offered 32 public nature walks because we want to help forge those connections for people. We not only want to show off, hey, look how good this looks, we can do this in more places, but we want people to understand why we're doing it and how it's affecting nature at Elings. And this year in 2026, we have a bunch of other walks lined up. So if you scan this QR code, you can go to our website and see if there's a walk that appeals to you. And in addition to trying to create large patches of functional habitat, we can also think about putting smaller patches of native plants in places where we have agriculture or other development and try to harness that power for some mutual benefit. And a good example of where we're doing that is in the Cuyama Valley. This is a fairly new project that's being undertaken by our ecology team. And they're working, for example, with 2 farms, Condor's Hope and Cuyama Homegrown, and setting up some seeded plots. They have 100 1-foot by 1-foot plots where they're seeding native annual and perennial wildflowers. They've installed 440 container plants, and then they're testing how those plants do with and without irrigation. So can we rely on natural rainfall, which is obviously a lot easier to replicate over time, the fewer inputs we put in? And then they're going to monitor those. How are the plants doing? What birds and bugs are using them? And then are we seeing any transferred benefit of pollinators and native beneficial insects that are helping with pests on the farms? So it becomes a win-win situation for nature and for the farmer. They're taking this a step further and getting that people piece as well, and working with the Cuyama Unified School District to develop a community garden, and also to develop native plant curricula for different ages of school kids in the area, because we really want to grow not just native plants, but native plant champions. And if we get this into the mindset of kids when they're young, then this is a conservation ethos they can carry with them through their whole lives. They're also working to develop a conservation internship program for 11th graders so that they can really get their hands dirty and get invested in this kind of work. And one other example of how we can harness the power of native plants is through the pollinator habitat program, which works with 22 farms along the coastal part of the Tri-Counties and incentivizes these farmers to plant patches of native plants to create a pollinator corridor along the coast. So you can see everywhere that there's a little bee icon is a farm that has agreed to plant native plants, and we're creating this little superhighway of resources for pollinators so that as they're migrating or traveling, there's forage for them every stop along the way. And then, of course, we're also hoping that the farmers see some benefit from having this extra insect and other biodiversity coming to their property. And then last but not least is this idea of reconnecting people with plants. Just remembering always that we're part of the ecosystem as well, and we're not always the bad guys. We can be a force for good, and very often we are. And we're doing this every day, trying to offer as many ways as possible to connect people to native plants at the garden itself. So when people come and visit, they can see a wide swath of the botanical diversity that we have in California, much more easily than driving thousands of miles north to south. It's accessible to folks to get that understanding of the diversity, the pollinators, the birds, the mammals, everybody who is playing in the garden, not just us. We also have the backcountry section to try to have kids and those young at heart just interact with nature in a physical way and remember how fun it is to just play in nature. We offer public lectures and workshops, such as the symposium, to try to spread our message, and summer camps for kids. Let them get dirty all summer playing in native plants. We have our rotating gallery exhibits at the conservation building, and the one we have right now is related to our symposium today, and specifically the Elings Park project. If you haven't been there, you should check it out. And then we have our retail nursery, trying to connect people directly with native plants that they can take home. We're also getting out of the canyon, and recently a bunch of folks from the garden, as well as downtown Santa Barbara and Friends of State Street, and 40 volunteers installed 200 plants on the 1200 block of State Street near the Granada Theater. So this is just trying to get native plants in front of people wherever we can, however we can. We're not necessarily trying to rebuild functional habitat in the middle of the sidewalk, but we never know. Maybe some bugs will start using it, and we have some interpretive signs there just to help people connect with a sense of place. When you see something that looks a little bit different, you're like, what's this plant? Oh, it's from here, just like me. That's cool. Alejandro is going to get into this a lot more in detail, but we're also offering a native plant landscaping certification course that's really a critical link between, as Doug was mentioning, the demand and supply is a little bit of a mismatch for native plants right now, and going hand in hand with that is the expertise of landscaping professionals. Many folks need some help picking plants and installing them and maintaining them, and so Alejandro is working to help train those people up and create that body of expertise locally. And then you can look on our website and find out who has this certification, and so we're not only helping to bring a new skill set to the landscapers, but we're then connecting them with the people who need their services. We also have something called the 805 Initiative, which is focused on trying to grow more plants from locally sourced genetics from our watersheds right here, so that especially for people who live near the wildland-urban interface, you're putting the right plant in the right place, and we don't have to worry about ecological contamination of planting something from San Diego, for example, that might not be as well adapted to Santa Barbara. And this is something that we'll be scaling up in the coming years. And then we're always trying to get people to join the native plant movement. And I want to make the point that I think Doug made this point as well. The barrier to entry can be pretty low. You don't have to have 10 acres to restore. You don't have to be a conservation scientist. And the first step for the uninitiated is just to develop that personal relationship with nature. We can help you with that at the garden. You can come take a walk. You can go on a hike on one of our lovely trails. You can look out your window and write about or draw what you see. Any little way to connect with nature is the right way, as long as it resonates with you. And then if you're ready to take it a step further, we really are encouraging people, of course, to plant natives in their yard and at their apartment. If you don't have a yard, that's okay. Container plants and balcony baskets work really well also. This photo is from Matt Wang, who used to be on our rare plant team. He now works at a botanic garden in Utah. Hi, Matt. Um, and he had an apartment in Goleta and planted a whole bunch of native wildflower seeds in his balcony baskets. And you can see he had really nice diversity just in this small strip and saw bees and hummingbirds visiting in his balcony. So to Doug's point, if all the balconies had native plants, we could create a lot of nice strips of native habitat. So you don't have to have a lawn and a shovel to help, and just to enjoy how beautiful the plants are. And then, of course, volunteering is a great way to get involved too. We have lots of opportunities in the nursery and on the garden grounds and at Elings Park. If you want to pull weeds, we've always got some. And lastly, I want to invite all of you here and at home to join us and become a native plant steward. So as Steve mentioned at the start of this, it's our 100th anniversary at the Botanic Garden. We're immensely proud of that, and we're trying to grow this movement as big as we possibly can. And if you follow this QR code, and there are also some cards out front that have this, you can join us in what we're calling our Native Plant Steward Program. It'll enroll you in, I promise, a short but interesting suite of emails to help you figure out what kind of native plant steward you are. Are you a gardener who wants to get your hands dirty and plant and help us at places like Elings? Are you a community builder who wants to help spread the word and bring more people into the movement? Are you a change maker who wants to advocate for native plants, both in California and locally here in Santa Barbara? Whatever you want to contribute is great. If all you want to do is get some emails and some stickers, that's great too. We're really just trying to get people to affirm their commitment to this idea that native plants matter and they're the solution to the biodiversity crisis, and so are we. And so I'm going to leave it there and take any questions. Yes, ma'am.
How do you, for people that aren't aware of the biodiversity crisis, who maybe aren't even involved with plants or, have plant blurriness, is that what I can say? What's your pitch to the fact that, we're in a biodiversity crisis? What do you tell them so that they care?
Right, so the question is, for people who maybe don't know about the biodiversity crisis or have the green blurs, how do we get that message across to them and help make them care? I think it's multifaceted. I think that the key is not to lead with, everything's terrible, everything's dying. At the garden, we like to say that we lead with hope and optimism because there's a lot of reason to be hopeful. I think that, man, if anybody is unaware that there's a biodiversity crisis, good on them. I don't know how they're escaping all the bad news. But, I think it starts with just asking folks to look around locally and to think about how they see nature in their own lives, and to really think about, the difference between a lawn where you don't really see much other life other than that green lawn, and then to give them the example of what it could be. We really try to focus on empowering people rather than bogging them down. I think so many of us are feeling like the problems are so big, they're global, what can we possibly do? And there was a quote from Jane Goodall that talked about, don't try to think about the problem globally. Think about it at whatever scale you can wrap your arms around and act there. So for someone that is just a normal person trying to go about their lives, that might be as simple as putting a native plant in their backyard or becoming a member of the Botanic Garden. For someone like me who gets to do this professionally, that means trying to think about the whole state of California and what we can do at the statewide scale. But not everybody has to do that to make a difference. And so I think for me, it's all about meeting people where they're at, helping them to understand in an important but gentle way that there is a problem, but we can solve it, and then trying to give them the tools to figure out how to do that. Anybody else? Oh, yes, it's so bright up here.
Is anybody working with big box nurseries? Get them on board with this?
The question is anybody working with the big box nurseries to try to get them on board with this? I'll give a small example of what I know from my previous involvement with the California Invasive Plant Council, where we had a campaign called Plant Right, working to discourage them from selling invasive plants. But I'm going to look to our Director of Horticulture, Keith, in the front row here to help me out. Are folks working with the big box stores?
It's really tough because of how capitalism works. Essentially, margins really isn't like a profitability thing. So it's been attempted before, but all of the
I'll repeat it too.
all the wholesale nurseries generally don't want to engage with the big box stores because the margins are so low and it's so tedious, and there's a lot of barriers to be able to operate successfully at that level.
All right. So the answer is that it's been tried. I see you. It's been tried. The margins are low, so there's a little bit of a financial and logistical barrier for wholesale nurseries. Yeah.
I'm on the education committee, and we've been actually surveying the local nurseries. And yeah, the big boxes are like nothing. We figured so far that we want to work with the local nurseries that are actually doing this. And you can come, you'll be able to come and see what we've figured out. And we're just encouraging you. So
That's great. Yeah.
if it turns out that everybody's actually selling native plants, well, you guess what? The big box is actually moving along that direction.
Yeah.
Right now, there really aren't enough native plants that they can sell.
Okay. So the comment was just that instead of trying to go for the big boxes directly, they're working with local nurseries to try to encourage them. And then we can get a little bit of industrial peer pressure. If they're getting a lot of business with the natives, then we create that need. That's the last question I have time for. But I'll be here all day, so you can find me later.